And critical in national budget is the word national as well. So I want a replacement for national and a replacement, a replacement word for national and a replacement word for budget. Anybody? National, what do you think? When you hear the word national, what do you think? All right, so right hand. Pardon? Worldwide. Anybody else with any idea? National. I see an hand going up. Alright. So we hear about country. And that is what it represents. National there represents the country. So the national budget is a budget for the country. Which country? When we're talking about our national budget, which country are we talking about? So Jamaica's national budget is about the entire country, Jamaica. So now we know that national refers to the entire country. We don't need a word to replace budget. Not a word, a phrase to replace budget. Something that explains what really the budget is.
It's a public record outlining all the country plans all the country plans spending.
Lovely. Could you all give her an applause? Good. So, from one person we hear that the national budget is about the country, and from another person we hear that the national budget is about how the government plans to spend. But that's just one side of the budget though, because when you do a budget, not only are you making a record of what is to be spent, but what else? What else? In order for you to be able to spend, you must also be showing what it is that you're going to earn. Somebody said earn. Who said earn? Good. So the national budget is a plan of how the government will be spending and the income it expects to receive in order to actually carry out that spending. All right? What did I say the national budget is? One bright spot. One bright spot. Tell me what the national budget is. And this is very bright spot. Yes, man, you heard correct. That's fine. I am Mike Shine. All right, so I'm going to do it one more time. I'm saying, what's your name, sir? Devante. Devante will tell us what the national budget is. So I said the national budget is a plan. What is that plan about? The plan is about the spending that is to be done over the fiscal year, as well as the income that is projected to be received during the fiscal year. So there are three components you need to be considering. That is a plan. The plan is about the spending and the income, and another word for spending is expenditure. So the expenditure and the income, and then it is for a period of time, which is the fiscal year. So tell me now the one. National budget. First stage is that? It's a plan. It's first man, it's a plan. Yeah, plan. What's that about? Plan is about income. What else? So we have a full understanding of what the national budget is. It's a plan of income and expenditure for 10 years' time. Is that the case? over the period of the fiscal year, right? Now, we're just getting us ready for the presentation that will be done by my colleague, Mrs. Jackson, who will be talking to you about the budget. All right? We're also indicating what the likely spending on income will be for the next. Information that we're concerned with today that will be presented will be the information about the plan my colleague presents to you. You will get a better understanding of what I mean by a financial year. So I want to invite Mrs. Jackson to speak to you about the budget.
Good morning. And how are we today? Are you excited as I am? So when I hear the word budget, it's a light bulb moment for me. And why? Why do you think our country needs a budget? Do you think the budget is enshrined in law? Absolutely. So our constitution, our Jamaican constitution, section 115, speaks to the Minister of Finance tabling a budget to be passed by the House of Parliament. And how many of you would have tuned into the budget debate? No? You find it boring? Well, the budget is your budget. It's Jamaica's budget, right? So we all have to know how the government of Jamaica is going to spend the revenue, the taxes, and so on, right? So the budget is a law. And remember, it is enshrined in the Constitution, section 115. So before the budget goes to Parliament, it first has to be formulated. So there's a budget formulation process. So who is responsible for this? Cabinet. So cabinet will sit and review a draft budget for the year. And the fiscal year is from April 1 to March 31st. So after reviewing the draft budget, yes, so look at page 4 in your request, you will see the process, budget formulation, so the cabinet will review the draft budget, and then cabinet will authorize the Ministry of Finance to issue a budget call. The budget call is really outlining. All right, students. Thank you. So the budget call is really outlining the ceiling to the different ministries, departments, and agencies of what is available to spend. And why do you think we need a ceiling? Can I get a volunteer? Any volunteer? Absolutely. Very good. Can we clap him? So remember, resources are not infinite. They get scarcer each year. So the government of Jamaica has to have a budget ceiling. So after the budget call is issued, the ministries will submit their proposals. Sometimes they're wish lists and sometimes they go over the ceiling. But we have to keep them in line, right? Because we don't have a lot of money. And then the budget goes to Parliament. And who tables the budget in Parliament? Which minister? Very good. The Minister of Finance, by law, tables the budget. And then it goes through the budget debate, and they vote on the budget. The House of Representatives will vote and pass the budget law. So after after the budget is approved, we have the appropriation bill. So the appropriation bill is the law that gives the ministries the right to spend. But before the ministries can spend the money, they have to get a warrant. It's not a warrant for the arrest, but a warrant is also enshrined in the Constitution of Jamaica. It's the legal instrument that authorizes the Accountant General who governs the consolidated fund. Now the consolidated fund is government big bank account. All the revenues are paid in and all the expenses come from that bank account. Right? So after the budget execution, after the ministry spend the budget, what do you think happens? Do you think they need to be audited? Do you want to know how your taxpayer dollar was spent? Yes? So the Auditor General, she is or he is the Auditor General department is government's external auditor. So they go in the ministries and they audit all the monies, all the expenditure. They will then do the report and table it in Parliament in front of the Public Accounts Committee, which is made up of parliamentarians among others, right? So the next thing I have to bring to your attention, when you think about budget, there are two sides to it. We call them financial patterns. You have recurrent expenditure. What do you think it means? When you hear the word, who are the COP students there, or management of business? Econ. When you hear the word recurrent, what comes to mind? Recurring. So it's monies that they have to pay over certain items of expenditure. For example, salaries for teachers, right? The subventions for the schools, paying the rent, the utilities, paying for goods and services, and so on. So even purchasing the pens, the stationery that you get, the books for the rental scheme, that's where the money goes to, right? To provide for you. So the next part of the expenditure is capital. So when you hear the word capital expenditure, what comes to mind? Yes? I'm a volunteer. Capital expenditure. Public investment. So an example of public investment would be what? Roads. And why roads are public investments? Right, yes, and for transport goods and services. So it's a long-term investment, right? So roads are bad. So we have to so the government is fixing the roads, right? So we have to fix all the roads, but phase one, phase at a time, right? So another public investment quickly, the schools. The schools are for long term, right? Hospitals, good. All right. So for this year, who can tell me how much the budget is able to? It's in your handout. What's the total budget? Can somebody volunteer quickly?
919 billion.
What's the total?
919.5 billion. That what?
The total budget?
So wait,
Total budget?
yes, sir. Oh, 990. Yeah, page 20. IT said.
Very good. We have a winner over here, $1.3 trillion. Thank you. So I'm now
page I did for.
Francis to tell us where the money comes from to fund the budget. We fund the one.
But you know this is a book here, Carmen.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Jackson.
Oh,
I started with the
right?
introduction, and I introduced myself, and I introduced Mrs. Jackson, who spoke here about the budget. But I do not want to leave without my other colleagues and actually introducing themselves. Just before I tell you about where the money comes from, I'm going to have my colleagues just to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Thompson Town. All right, my name is Nastasia Bedford. I work in the Finance and Accounts Division, Final Accountant.
Good morning, Thompson Town High. Good morning, Thompson Town High. Okay, I'm Sue Ray and I'm from the Communications branch.
Morning, Thompson Town High. I am from the Office Services Division. That's why you're working.
Good morning, Thompson Town High. I am Cheryl Smith and I'm from the Debt Management branch and I'm going to tell you about computer.
Good morning, Thompson Town High. Justin Graham here from the Communications branch.
Good morning, Thompson Town High. I am Julie Anderson and I am from the Communications branch.
All right, thank you very much. So that's a team from the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. Now, the opportunity is mine now to talk to you a little bit about where the money comes from. What amount of money I'm going to tell you about?
From everybody.
What amount of money I'm going to be telling you about? Precisely, or also brilliant, I'm telling you. If the government plans to spend $1.3 trillion, then we need to define it. $1.3 trillion to spend, right? Good. So now there are generally three sources for financing for the government. We have what we call non-borrowed resources. Anybody at the front heard what I said? The first source we say is what? At the front. The first source. Good, somebody at the front said non-borrowed resources. The second is borrowed resources. Did you hear what about the second? The second one, borrowed resources. Somebody in the middle, tell me what the second source is. At the middle. All right, so the middle says borrowed resources. And then finally, at the back, the government would have accumulated some savings. So from one fiscal year to another, what you may find is that the amount that the government projected that it will collect is more than what it actually spent. What it means is that there's some surplus or excess, and that is actually being held in the government's bank accounts. So over time, this amount accumulates, builds up. And so there are times when the total of the borrowed resources and the non-borrowed resources is not sufficient to cover the budget. And so the government will go into their savings in order to supplement, in order to add on to what they will borrow and what they collect during that fiscal year. Now, the non-borrowed resources is a term we use to refer to the non-borrowed resources. That is called revenue and grants. Somebody at the front. What is the term used to refer to non-borrowed resources? Good. Somebody at the back. What's the term used to refer to non-borrowed resources? Somebody heard. The term referring to non-borrowed resources. Revenue and grants. And then now we have borrowed resources. What term do we generally refer to borrowed resources? Who said that? Somebody said loans, good. So now, in total, I said to you that we will require $1.3 trillion in order to spend on the planned programs of the government in order to provide goods and services for the fiscal year. Now, of that $1.3 trillion, 949.5 billion of it is expected to come from taxes. Guess who will pay the taxes?
And the lie. And the lie, my tail got
I have so many pay the taxes that somebody said the taxi man. Of course. But it's not government taxes that will pay the taxes. Who else will pay the taxes? Yes. And so, you will see on one of the tax lines for the budget. You can see it on our
Mighty God.
on the signs we have here. The national budget is everybody's business because it impacts every Jamaican.
Yes.
It's not just the spending that impacts Jamaicans. The income side of it impacts Jamaicans too because we all contribute to the taxes that the government will collect in a fiscal year. Okay? Now, what are some of these taxes that we pay as Jamaicans? What are some of the taxes? Land tax, we are otherwise called property taxes. GCT, General Consumption Tax. Education tax. Income tax.
So what
Right. So now these are some of the taxes, but that does not exhaust the taxes that we pay. All right. In addition to the taxes, though, there are some other resources we call non-tax revenue. Now, this year we're planning to collect about 139.8 billion in non-tax revenues. You may ask, what are non-tax revenue? Well, non-tax revenues are like the fees and the fines and money that is given to the government by public bodies. So these are entities that are actually controlled by the government that are engaged in operations that result in income for them. And some of that income they distribute, they give to the government in order for the government to be able to spend based on their planned expenditure program. All of that money together, the fines, the fees, and the distribution, some interest as well, that constitute the non-tax component of the non-core resources. And then in addition to those two, we have grants, and grants really are just monies that we get, and it's not just monies, it can be in cash or kind. It's resources we get from international institutions as well as from 8 other governments. And then there's a small amount, about 812 million, that will come from bauxite levy. And bauxite levy is really just a fee to me that is levied on the bauxite companies for when they actually do the bauxite production. Now that comprises the non-borrowed resources, revenue and grants as I call them. On the borrowed resources side, government is expecting to get about $158 billion in borrowed resources. Otherwise called, borrowed resources otherwise called loans. And of this borrowed resource, we are expecting about 90 billion to come from the local market. So, the banks, the local banks, NCB, etc. As well as from individuals who wish to invest in the government, who need to lend monies to the government, probably from brokers. In addition to the monies to be borrowed on the local market, we are expecting some amounts to come as well from external partners. So it could be other countries, other international institutions. All right? And I'm going to ask my colleague, Mrs. Smith, to speak to you a little bit about what that borrowing does. That borrowing actually causes you to accumulate a D word, debt. And she will be speaking to us a little bit about debt. But before she does, the final source I spoke to you about was savings. And so of the savings that the government would have accumulated, we have built up over the number of years, we are looking to utilize about 578 million of that. Together, that gives you the $1.3 trillion that the government needs in order to carry out the spending that it has planned for financial year 25-26. So I'm going to ask now Mrs. Smith to speak to you a little bit about the debt.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. All right, let me see how much many of you have borrowed money from your friends. I know, right? Or from a teacher from the teacher. Alright? So that will constitute you owing a debt. Right? Meaning that you have borrowed money that you have to pay back for. The only difference is that the money that you borrow, you don't have to pay any interest on it. Right? So, recapping, Mrs. Jackson told you that there's a budget, right? We have to formulate a budget. The government has to put together all those items that we're going to spend for, right? What is that figure? 1.3 trillion, right? Then Mr. Francis told you about how we're going to fund that 1.3 trillion through revenues, which includes non-borrowed resources, what else? Loans, all right, and saving, right? Now, when we look at all of that, right, there will still be gaps in the budget because you never have enough money to fund an entire budget. And so therefore, that's where the borrowed resources come from. So that's where my branch comes in, where we manage our borrowed resources. So we are tasked with finding the extra funding, and I think Mr. Francis mentioned it, $158 billion is what we have to source this year to help to make up that $1.3 trillion. And how do we get this funding? And Mr. Francis did touch on it, right? Look.
Smart.
Wonderful. Can I get a prize for you, please? Wonderful.
They are
All
more
right.
besto.
So we get from two sources. The low cost source, which is our banks and financial institutions, as what's your name? Murray. As Murray said, from your NCBs and your Scotia and your Gemini, right? But then we also borrow from overseas, which is what we call our external stakeholders, right? Have you heard of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund? Right? Have you heard of World Bank? And have you heard of the Inter-America Development Bank? All right, so we get loans from those multilaterals, right? When we get these loans from them, we have to manage them, right? Because remember, what we don't want is that your debt balloons, because when your debt balloons, you have to find more money to pay on those debts. And what may happen is that we may have to cut into the budget. Now you know you have only so much money to spend on security, to spend on health, to spend on school education. No one would want that to be cut, right? Right, and so that is where my branch comes in. We manage the risk, right? And I'm not going to go deeply, I'm not going to go into the risk, right? But I'll tell you about three of them. Have you heard of interest rate? When the interest rate goes up, your money goes up, right? In the simplest form. There's inflation. I'm sure you've heard of inflation, right? That's a risk to manage, and also refinancing. But the one that I want to bring your attention to is our foreign currency risk. Because remember, we're borrowing 68, or we intend to borrow $68 billion from our external stakeholders. And that would be denominated in foreign currency, more than likely in US dollars. right? Now, can you tell me how much Jamaican dollars it costs to purchase $1 US? Over here? All right, I see your reading. It has reached 159. I don't know what the rate is today, right? So think about it. You have to buy $1, you have to have 159 Jamaican dollars. Now think about us borrowing $68 billion in euros. So that's a money to pay back, right? And so we have to manage these risks, right? And when we manage these risks, what I mean is that we find ways to ease or minimize the risk to the portfolio. The last thing I'll touch on that my team also monitors is our credit rating, right? Let me ask you a question. If somebody borrow money from you consistently and don't pay back, right? Will you lend them money? Why? There you go. They're not going to pay back and you're losing, right? Because remember, that's their resource that they're lending you, right? And so they needed to do something, right? So that's where credit ratings come in, right? Because we are assessed by 3 agencies, right? And they tell our investors how credible we are in terms of paying back our debt, right?